tonight as well. We heard today a story about boat and boating, and we'll hear another story about boats and on the water. I have to say that the stories of the Bible always take on a little bit different context in Minnesota because for half of the year, all of us can walk on water. But we will hear a story about that coming up. But think about Minnesota in the summer. In fact, think about boating in general. Do you know that Minnesota has more boats per capita than any other state in the nation by far? Number 2 is Wisconsin. We are a land of boats of all different kinds. How many of you have a boat? A fishing boat, a canoe, some kind of boat? All right. Well, a lot of Minnesotans have boats, but even if you don't have one of those kinds of boats, you do have a boat. And that boat is right here in the church. At least those of you who are sitting in this section of the church. Because in church architecture terms, this part of the church is called the nave. If you want to get fancy, this is the chancel, and we're sitting up in the chancel, and these would be the transepts. But you're sitting in the boat, in the nave. Sounds like a word you know, right? Navy, same roots. Now, why do you think that they would call the place where the people come to worship in a church the nave or the navy, the boat? Well, there's lots of boat stories in the Bible. And the boat has become an image for the church from biblical times. Think of all those stories of boats. Think about Noah's Ark, big boats like that, or the ship of Psalm 107 that we just heard about. Or think about the fishing boats where Jesus preached from, or as in the story that we'll hear in a minute, where Jesus calmed the sea and asked Peter to step out onto the waters. Some churches are even built to look like a boat. Have you ever been in a church where if you looked up, all the rafters were not arranged in this kind of square section, but were arranged to look like the ribs of a boat turned upside down? That's intentional. A lot of Scandinavian architecture uses that. And the point is to make the church look like we're inside the boat. So there's something about being in the boat and being together in that boat that's important, at least for the church architects and even for the scriptures. The boat image says we're all in this boat together here in this church. The boat image says we are on a journey with God. The boat image says something about togetherness and divine protection and even giving thanks, like in our psalm this morning. Let them give thanks to the Lord for God's love, God's faithful love and marvelous work for all people. Let them exalt God in the congregation of the people. So there's all sorts of meaning to the church as a boat, to being in the nave. But there's one that I really want to lift up today. One more connection with the image of the boat. And that is that boats are meant to do something. They're meant to take you someplace. They're meant to accomplish a purpose. So what is the purpose of this church? Well, you have a bulletin. I assume this is on the bulletin every week. Federated Church's mission statement: to take God's love in the community to serve others. That is your purpose. That's why you're in this boat together. If you want to extend it a little bit further, the UCC has a purpose statement. And they take it from the book of Matthew as well. And it's simply the words of Jesus: to love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and our neighbor as ourselves. And the United Methodist Church says their purpose in this way: to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. See, we have a purpose in being here. Sometimes we think of the purpose of the church as just a nice warm place to come on a Sunday, or a place to have a potluck, or maybe a comfortable place where we can relax with some of our friends, and all that stuff is good. But it's not the ultimate purpose of the church. Our purpose here, as we have said, is to take God's love into the community, to serve others, to love the Lord and our neighbor as ourselves, to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. We have a purpose in coming together. Now, sometimes we get a little confused about what kind of boat we're on. Sometimes we think less of the biblical boats and we think more of maybe the church as a cruise ship. I have to say that I had signed up for my very first cruise this fall, and I backed out because I just didn't see the purpose of the cruise. There's a pastor, Mark Rawls, who was in North Carolina, and he had a blog, and he wrote a comparison about a cruise ship and the ship of the church, or the biblical fishing boats of the Bible. And he says there's a big difference between the two. He says, first of all, cruise ships are often huge. Did you know that the largest cruise ship, the Symphony of the Sea, holds more passengers than the entire community of Morris? Every single person in town could get on that ship with space left over. That's a cruise ship. The church is often much smaller, like we are here. We're more like a fishing boat than a cruise ship. Difference in size. He said the second thing, he says, cruise ships have passengers who let the crew do all the work for them. You go on a cruise and you don't expect to have to do dishes. You don't expect to have to prepare food for a potluck because somebody else is going to prepare it for you. You don't have to worry about keeping the ship running. You don't have to worry about anything. You let the crew take care of it, and you're just along for the ride. And of course, in churches, it doesn't work that way. In churches, we are all part of the crew. We're all working together. There is no one to do it for us. We share the work. Third thing he says that on cruise ships, everyone does their own thing. Whatever they want. Some people, they just want to sit out and lie on those chairs on the deck. Others want to take part in the entertainment. Others want to spend the whole time eating. Whatever they want to do, sleeping, they do their own thing on a cruise ship. But on those fishing boats of the Bible, they needed everyone to pull together as a team. Whether it be raising the sails or manning the oars or hauling in the fishing nets. It took everybody working together, just like it does in the church. The fourth thing he said is cruise ships. On a cruise ship, you may never even have to encounter most of the other people. In fact, if you go on that Symphony of the Sea, it's impossible for you to encounter everybody. But on a cruise ship, you don't have to be with people if you don't want. You can kind of stay to yourself. But on the disciples' boats, and those fishing boats where Jesus was, mixing wasn't an option. Because you were all working together, you were all eating together, you were all sharing stories and entertaining yourselves together. It was something that you all did together. Just like in the church. And then finally he says, cruise ships don't take a lot of courage to go on. I mean, there's not much that you fear in going on a cruise ship unless it's those 5 extra pounds you're going to gain from all the food you're going to eat. But when you got on one of those boats in the Bible, whether it be a large boat like the ship in Psalm 107 or a smaller fishing boat, it was a scary deal. Small boats in big water. I'm glad that none of the kids had that kind of experience of being out in a boat in a big storm, because usually we'll stay off the water. But those folks didn't have a choice, and they were on the waters, and it was scary. So let me read to you the second scripture, the one from Matthew. that talks about one time when they were out in the boat and a storm came up. Jesus at once made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the opposite shore while he dismissed the crowds. After he had sent the crowds away, Jesus went up the mountain by himself to pray, and when evening came, he was there by himself. The boat had already gone some distance from shore and was being smashed around by the waves, since the wind was against it. At the very dead of night, he came toward them, walking on the water. The disciples saw him walking on the sea and panicked. "It's a ghost," they said, and they screamed in terror. But Jesus at once spoke to them. "Cheer up," he said, "it's me. Don't be frightened." "If it's really you, Master," said Peter in reply, "give me the word to come to you on the water." "Come along then," said Jesus. Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind, he was afraid and began to sink. "Master," he yelled, "rescue me." And Jesus at once reached out his hand and caught him. "Fine lot of faith you've got," he said. "Why did you doubt?" And they got into the boat, and the wind died down, and the people in the boat worshipped him. "You really are God's Son," they said. Sometimes when we're boating with Jesus, it takes a lot of courage. In fact, more courage than just getting into the boat, because sometimes Jesus asks us to get out of the boat, to step out onto the waters and to discover lessons that we had never even dreamed of, ability to do things that we thought far beyond ourselves, levels of trust that we didn't know we had. And it's the same way in the church. Sometimes Jesus calls us to step outside the nave and to take risks and to dare and to maybe even walk on water. Recently, I read a book called Canoeing the Mountains by Todd Bolsinger. It's a book about the Lewis and Clark expedition. And if you remember back from your high school history, back in the early 1800s, when we'd gotten the Louisiana Purchase, President Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark and their crew to discover this new territory that had become a part of America. They were called the Corps of Discovery, and their purpose was to learn all about the geography and the animals and the people of this new region. But most of all, to canoe and boat their way up the Missouri River to discover the famed Northwest Passage, the water route that would make it easy to cross the country on water. That water route that would lead you all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Now, I know you're saying there is no water route, but they didn't know that. At the time, they were going off the map. They didn't know what was there. And they figured that if you just got in your canoes and your boats and you went up the Missouri and it eventually get to as far up the mountain as you could, and then you would just cross over onto the other side and there'd be another stream going down that side, and you'd go down that side and you'd make your way to the Pacific. They thought it'd be easy. Simple thing. So they set out. And Lewis and Clark and the Corps of Discovery paddled up the Missouri River, and by fall they reached what they would call Fort Mandan, and they stayed there for the winter. And there they secured the services of a French-Canadian trapper, Toussaint Charbonneau, and he was to be their guide. And it turns out that he was fairly useless. But Charbonneau's wife, Sacagawea, or Sacagawea, depending on which translation you would use, proved to be the lifesaver of the crew. Sacagawea was born a Shoshone in Idaho, captured by the Hidatsa tribe when she was 11 or 12 years old, and sold into slavery. And at the time that Lewis and Clark arrived, she'd just given birth to a little boy and was about 16 or 17 years old when she joined the Corps of Discovery along with Charbonneau. In that spring, they set off paddling again up the river, and by August 12th, they reached the trickle of the stream there on where the Missouri started, and they gave thanks to God that their journey was almost complete. They thought that they were just a half a day's little travel over the top, and they would go down the other side of the Continental Divide, and they would have completed their mission. Now, we know that there's not simply one mountain to go over. You have all of the Rockies that you get through. You know, it's not like the Continental Divide that's between here and Herman. Did you know that? Continental Divide is between here and Herman, just by Donnelly. The rain that falls here winds up in the Gulf of Mexico. The rain that falls in Herman winds up in Hudson Bay. Now, it's pretty easy to go over that. In fact, you probably don't even notice it when you drive. But the Rocky Mountains are something different, and the Corps of Discovery didn't know that. But Sacagawea did. You see, everybody else is going off the map, but she was going home. She was from Idaho. She was going to the place that she knew. And she knew about the Rockies, and she knew that the Corps of Discovery would never get there by staying in the boat. And so she talked to them about getting horses instead for the journey. And she led them across, and not only was it her guiding that helped them, but even her very presence helped them. Because neighboring tribes knew that a war party would not bring along a young woman and her child. And so they gave the benefit of the doubt to the Corps of Discovery that they weren't there as a war party, and they had safe travel. Now, everybody else thought they were going to be able to stay in the boat. But she knew that you're going to have to get out, and you're going to have to do some different things than what you expected. You see, they could have turned back. The Corps of Discovery could have said, why listen to this young woman here? Why don't we just stay in our boats, turn around, and go back? But instead, they listened. They listened to a person of another ethnic group, another gender, another culture, another age group. There couldn't have been anything more dissimilar between her and these military guys that were leading this Corps of Discovery. And yet they listened to her, and they got out of their boats, and they completed their mission. You know, it's great to be in the nave. It's great to be in the church. It's wonderful when we can come together. When we're all safe and we're protected and we're with God. But you know, the world out there has changed a whole lot. And sometimes it may seem even like it's a foreign land now. The things are so different. And we can stay safe inside our nave, safe inside the boat. Or we can step out of the boat. We can go outside. We can take God's love out into the community to serve them. And as we do that, we're probably going to have to listen to people that aren't like us. We're probably going to have to follow people we never thought we would follow and take their advice and learn from them. And that can be scary, but it's also an exciting journey. When we do that, we find that we can do more than we ever imagined, like Peter stepping out onto the water. You may have seen in the news last summer, the Grace Church over in Painesville. They did something bold and new that they never thought they would do. They had been trying to get the people that come to Lake Coronas to come into town and go to church. You know, they were getting out, they were inviting people. But the people at the lake said, we come to the lake to be at the lake, not to drive back into town and be in church. But if you had church here, then we'd come. So the folks at Grace Church, they looked out and they noticed that on Sunday evenings, all these people would get into their pontoon boats and they would drive around, just cruise around the lake. They jokingly called it a pontoon parade. And they talked to a resort and they said, can we anchor a pontoon off your resort? And can we hold services out there? And they said, sure. So they got 2 people to donate pontoons that they could use. And every Saturday night, they put the pontoons out outside on the lake, outside this resort, and they held worship for the people on the lake. And they would get 30 to 50 people every Saturday night. So basically what we have here, every Saturday night, people who would never go into town to go to church. They literally got out on the water. Of course, they used the pontoon to do it, but they got out onto the water to do something different, to reach people and to serve them. And you can imagine, one pontoon was for the music and the worship leaders, and the other pontoon was for the coffee and refreshments. But people would pull up in their pontoons, like you can see in that picture. It was something beyond their wildest imaginations, but they were able to reach out because they listened to the people who weren't like them. For the people in church, the most convenient place to be is at the church. But for the people outside the church, that may be the last place that they would be. Well, here we are gathering as the church, and we're going to have our annual meeting of the church. And we're sitting here in the nave, in the boat of the church. And it may sound like a strange thing to be talking about, getting out of the boat and taking risks and doing new things. But really, you've been about that, haven't you? You really have. You have done so many things this last year. I'm so excited you're going to hear about them at the annual meeting, see them in the reports. You had 7 baptisms here. Do you know how many churches in the district have had 7 baptisms? You had 21 new members here in 1 year. That's astounding. If you start listing off all of the ways in which you're reaching out and serving, it is that, I mean, even in today, the 2-hour delay cafe, the community meals, all of the things that you're doing to serve and to let people know the love of God, you are getting out, and I commend you. And this next year, there's more exciting things in store for. Are you all aware that you received a $25,000 grant from the Minnesota Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church? So you can have a staff person geared towards reaching the next generation. And that's not my generation. It's not a lot of our generation. But you are investing in the next generations. You are reaching out. And they may look completely different from us. But God is calling us to listen to them and to connect with them. You have a great boat here. This is a beautiful facility. And if you think hard enough, you can almost even imagine that it's not a rectangular shape, but you can imagine these as the ribs of a boat. And this is a great nave to be in, and it's a great place to worship God. And I know that you'll do that. You'll give thanks like those sailors in Psalm 107, but I also know that this year you will take steps out onto the waters that may be frightening, but you'll do it because Jesus calls, and you'll do it because there are people in this community that you want to share the love of God with. So God bless you. Thank you for all that you've done. Thank you for what you will do. And thank the Lord that we can be together. Amen.